Now, they do all of this despite violating the Torah, the Bible's restriction of intermarrying with Moabites. It's forbidden to do what they did. Deuteronomy 23:3. No Ammonite or Moabite, by the way, the Ammonites live just above Moab, right here. Okay? In the northern border of Ammon, I know you don't care, but it's the Jabbok River. Okay? So Ammon's here, Moab's there. So, no Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord. None of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever enter the assembly of the Lord. So, despite the restriction on doing this, they do it anyways. According to Jewish legend, and all it is, it's just legend. Who knows? Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. According to legend, Ruth, the Moabitess, was the daughter of Eglon, the king, remember him? In Judges chapter 3. Who Ehud, remember? Ehud, the assassin, who had the sword of a cubit's length hidden under his garment, and he thrust it into his belly, and the hilt also went in, and the whole sword went up in him. Remember that one? Yeah. So according to legend, exactly. According to legend, that's her dad, Ruth's dad. Who knows? Who knows? Verse number 5. We'll go about 15 more minutes, we'll take a break. Verse number 5. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left, and her 2 sons and her husband. Mahlon, his name means sick, or sickly. And Chilion, his name means pining, to pine away. So sickly and piningly, never mind. Unlike their true names, right? Unlike their true names, they died about 10 years. But when I say it's unlikely their true names, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say unlikely. It's possibly not their true names. Who would name their son sickly? Who would name their son pining away? You know what I mean? So, whatever. So, these guys died about a decade, about 10 years, after their unlawful marriage. According to Jewish tradition, like the Talmud and the oral law, that God killed them because they broke the Torah. They married Moabite women. So Naomi, nevertheless, that's not important. What is important is that Naomi, one of the stars in the book, she was now landless. She was now childless. She was now out of the promised land without any legal or economic protection. In other words, Naomi lost her identity. And losing her identity, she loses the 2 staples that hold everything together in the worlds of the Bible. Land and family. Everything in the Bible is about land and family. In our world, not so much. You know, everyone's renting now. No one's buying land like they used to buy a big piece of land. That's just, handing it down generations. Americans don't do that anymore. And Americans really don't do family anymore. Right? 60% of marriages end up in divorce. So it's difficult for Americans, not maybe you, but them, right, to relate to the staples of land and family. That's what holds the fabric of the society together. So there's Naomi, landless, childless, out of the promised land, no economic protection, no Medicare checks, no Medicaid checks, no EBT cards, no money, no nothing. Like she's like at the bottom. Big trouble. Like really, 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 really big trouble. Verse 6. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. After the deaths of her husbands and her sons, and at least a decade-long stay in Moab, good news, good tidings reached Naomi. that the famine was over. Famine was over, and there was bread once again in the house of bread. You're looking at your average, that's a recent picture, and that's exactly what it would have looked like, pretty close to what it would have looked like in the world of the Bible.
A tortilla.
It's the equivalent of a giant tortilla. Yeah, you can see it, 2 rocks right there. You get a flat piece of copper, bronze, steel, or whatever, real thin, kind of like the size and the shape of like a pizza pan, And then you just get your bread, right? Boom, flip it over. That's it. Okay? Not much has changed. Okay, now, this was a long famine, maybe a decade. Okay? Now, such a long famine is not unreasonable. Herodotus, the Greek historian, who is writing about, the time of Alexander the Great, somewhere around there, he records an 18-year famine in Lydia. And Lydia is the state, the region where Timothy was from. Much later, of course.
How long do you say this famine was?
This one right here in the book of Ruth, the book of Ruth, maybe 10 years. Something like that, yeah. But with Herodotus, he's recording a famine that happens for 18 years, right? Last sentence. This was their way of life for 18 years. He talks all about the famine. Okay? So we see the word return here in verse number 6. Return is one of the key words of the book. One of the hook words of the book, especially in the first chapter, where it is used 8 times in the first chapter. And this may indicate, because we don't know who wrote the book or when the book was written, it may indicate that the book was composed after the return of the Babylonian exile. It's possible. It's possible. Verse number 7. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. Perceiving better opportunities now that the famine was over, and wishing to live out her days in her home state, Naomi prepares to return back to Judah. Now, she was honored, as was the custom in verse number 7, by being accompanied by her host. In this case, the host to Stiz were her 2 Moabite daughters-in-law. And the custom was, we see it in verse 7, is to bring her out of the town for a distance. And it's the same thing that Abraham does in Genesis 18:16, same custom. When the men got up to leave, they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. That's the same thing that these 2 girls are doing here. It's the same thing kind of sort of we still do today, right? Someone leaves the house, right? You stand by the front door until they put their shoes on. Maybe you walk them up to their car, especially, right, if it's someone you really like, just hospitality. And that's exactly what they're doing here. She had been dwelling, we see in verse number 7, in something called the cultivated fields of Moab. So she had been dwelling in the cultivated fields of Moab, which is probably referring to the famous Medeba Plateau. The Medeba Plateau, what's that all about? Well, right here in northern Moab, right around here, this is a really, just look out the window, you see all those up and down, the elevation right there? Right, that's what Moab looks like. It's up, down, up. There's not a lot of flat areas like we are here, okay? But there's a really plateauy, flat area, right, right here, okay? Where there's tons of cultivated fields. And that's the word used in verse number 7. So she's probably living there. A great place to go to escape a famine, right? Opportunity is right on Highway 10, as it were, or the other Highway 5, the other north-south route, but east of the Trans-Jordan, a really good place.
So if she was living way up there, why wouldn't they have taken the northern route?
The northern route? Well, I don't know. Like I said, I'm not sure what route they took. The physical, like I mentioned, the physical geography of the cultivated fields of Moab. This is where 5 and 299 and 273 and 44 all come together. It's kind of, think of like Reddit. Okay, it's a great place for opportunity. There's jobs, there's a market, there's traffic, there's people, there's relatives. So if we're going to wait out a famine, let's try it here. And there it is, right about there. Okay. One more. Verse number 8. And Naomi said unto her daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. Probably upon reaching the edge or the border of Moab, at the edge of the Dead Sea, we'll just say for sake of argument near here, near the lisan, the tongue, the crossing, the vulnerable, very vulnerable, yet determined widow upholds, in verse number 8, she upholds the girl's future reputation by formally releasing them from any responsibilities her widowed and childless daughters-in-law were socially obligated to, since she had no unmarried sons for them to marry. In other words, she is like getting them a get-out-of-jail-free card. She brings them all the way to the border, right? They walk her to the border, and she says to them, Go, return each to your own house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with me. As we'll see momentarily, I don't have any sons, right, for you to remarry. So instead of living your life as a perpetual widow, even though you're probably only like in your 20s, right, go back home. They are told to return to their mother's house in verse number 8, not their father's house. They're told to return to their mother's house. Since it was customary at this time for women of age, marriageable age, and also young widows, to abide in separate apartments in the tent under the administration and care and watchful eye of their mother. Okay? One more verse. Verse number 9. The Lord grant you that you might find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. As was the custom, a blessing or a benediction was given by the departing party. Naomi wished the girls to find a place of rest in the home of a new husband in their own country. In order to show her affection for these girls and to bid them a final farewell, Naomi customarily kisses them goodbye. And we see that, for example, in 1 Samuel 20:41. Remember the story when David and Jonathan are shooting arrows? Remember that one? After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. What does it even mean when they bow? You know, you hear like they bow their face to the ground. We'll see that in Ruth. It's how the Muslims pray to this day. Basically what it means is the person is doing this, okay? And then they put their forehead on the floor, like that, like you are at the lowest possible, right, position to that person, like humbly submitted to them. That's how Muslims pray, like that, boom, head on the floor. Okay, that's what David's doing. King David's doing that. Okay. Then they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most, right? Because he knows he's not going to see him again. It's the bidding of the farewell, right? And you kiss your friend goodbye. Okay. See you at 3 o'clock. Oh, by the way. So, I stopped a couple of minutes early because I wanted to tell you something. Okay, so here's how this class works. I don't care if you read the textbook. Okay? All I want you to do is just come to class, like every class if you can. Okay? Take good notes. Okay? And that's it. It's the class you don't have to worry about on your schedule. Okay? you have 2 papers due. Both papers are due like before finals. They'll be due in April sometime. You have 2 papers to do, and you're gonna have 1 test. You have 1 big test. Then you'll have 3 quizzes. When I mean quiz, I mean you'll have a mini test on Ruth, a mini test on Lamentations, and a mini test on Esther. Then you have 1 big test for all 3. But with the mini test and the big test, you can use your notes. Okay? And it'll be matching, multiple choice, essay, short answers, and you have to memorize a chapter. Okay? So you have to memorize a chapter from Ruth, or from Lamentations, or from Esther. Okay?
What are the papers like?
We'll talk about that later. If you have an idea, come talk to me. It could be something like, what is the archaeological proof for the Book of Lamentations? Or in other words, what's the archaeological proof for the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 by the Babylonians? Right? Or it could be like, something like an essay on Nebuchadnezzar. Who's Nebuchadnezzar? Who destroyed Jerusalem? Right? He's the man behind Lamentations. Right? Something like around that. Yeah. Okay, 3 o'clock, yes.
So